There is a circulating idea that an elegant photo would show Josephine, wife of Wyatt Herp. It became the cover of Glenn Boyer's book, I Married Wyatt Herp, in 1976. Boyer claimed it was from 1880, but the engraving is from 1914 and was registered as Coloma. The error stuck to the cover and from then on multiplied mistaken attributions and still confuses readers today. Bill Doolin became the most famous outlaw of Oklahoma Territory. He started with the Dalton Gang and escaped the Coffeyville shootout in 1892. Relentlessly pursued, he saw the gang dwindle. In 1896, a cabinet card by W.B. Doherty in Guthrie recorded his body riddled with heavy buckshot after the action of Deputy Marshal Heck Thomas. Texas desperado no longer exists, the newspapers noted. John Wesley Harden, a gunslinger forged in post-Civil War violence, fell at the Acme Saloon in El Paso when Officer John Selman fired. It was August 19, 1895. The outcome crowned years of escapes, trial, and prison. The obituary sealed a cycle of crime and the decline of the Old West. Tom Horn was a scout in the Apache Wars, a roping champion, and a Pinkerton agent before becoming a cattle detective in Wyoming. In 1901, he ended up arrested for the shot that killed 14-year-old Willie Nickel, possibly mistaken for his father, Kells. In Cheyenne, 1903, he awaited hanging while braiding horsehair riatas, a scene recorded by W.G. Walker. At 18, John Wesley Harden notes in the album the end of the cattle drive along the Chisum Trail to Abilene, Kansas, in 1871. The journey left traces. Reports say that along the way, he killed 4 Mexicans. In Abilene, at the American House Hotel, he shot the guest in the next room, perhaps for snoring. By the time he died in 1895, between 27 and 42 deaths were attributed to him. Recorded in 1907 in the Bolivian Andes, the image is considered the last known photograph of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Cassidy is seen mounted on a mule. Beside him, Sundance adjusts the tack on his own animal. The record belongs to the pair's final phase, when on the run, they were already being watched by local authorities and informants. In 1864, at 17, Jesse James and his brother Frank joined the Confederate guerrilla in Missouri, ambushing Union troops. Peace brought no truce. In the post-war, he became a famous outlaw. The end came early. On April 3, 1882, inside his home, he was betrayed by Robert Ford, a man from his own gang, and killed with a shot to the back of the head. An albumin photo taken in 1900 caught Pinkerton agents in the hunt for the Wild Bunch gang. On the left is Charlie Ringo, former cowboy in Texas and New Mexico, who joined the agency in 1886 and in 1912 published A Cowboy Detective. On the back, he names the partner on the right, William B. Sayers, mentioned in the book as W.O. Sales. In 1907, Emerson Hough portrayed him in The Story of the Outlaw. John Simpson Chisum, a cattle rancher since 1854, joined between 1866 and 1867 in partnership with Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving, driving herds to New Mexico Territory. Years later, his ranch sheltered Billy the Kid and the Regulators during the Lincoln County War in 1878. This cabinet card came from a photo taken in Nebraska City around 1875. Years later, with Jesse's assassination, the Taylor's Copying Company of St. Louis began producing and spreading copies on a large scale. It catered to popular curiosity and the profitable business of reproductions. The card became both a keepsake and a vestige of an era. In a time of distrust of law and courts, the photo captures who remained. In front are deputies Heck Thomas from Guthrie and Morris Robacker from Pawhuska, also chief of Osage Police. Behind them are Osage Scouts Spotted Dog Eater and Howling Wolf. In the last row, Clerk John H. Havaghorst from Pawnee and Assistant Attorney General Roy Hoffman. Apache Kid, a native from the San Carlos Reservation, served as a guide for the U.S. Army in Arizona. In 1887, after a mutiny and gunfight, he was tried and convicted. He escaped during transfer. He became hunted by posses and rangers, operating between Arizona and Sonora until he vanished. Reports point to his capture or death in the early 20th century. In 1848, Myra Maybelle Shirley was born, whom the West named Belle Starr. Among the younger gang, she joined Jim Reed and later Sam Starr. In 1886, she posed with Deputy Marshal Benjamin Tyner Hughes. Arrested at Younger's Bend and taken to Fort Smith for robbery, she was acquitted. Everything changed when Sam died on December 17th. I'll leave a secret bonus in the pinned comment for those who love the Old West. Don't miss it. It's for a limited time. In 1895, a cabinet card shows Roy Bean, who called himself the Law West of the Pecos. Justice of the Peace in Langtry, Texas, he held hearings in the Jersey Lily Saloon, handing down fines and quick sentences, guided by state laws and his own interpretation. His routine exposes frontier justice at the end of the 19th century. How did he apply these rules? John W. Poe from Kentucky migrated to Texas in the 1870s, worked as a buffalo hunter, and later as a lawman. In 1881, at 31, the Canadian River Cattle Association hired him as a detective to pursue Billy the Kid and his gang. On July 14th, he accompanied Pat Garrett to Fort Sumner, New Mexico, in the operation that led to the outlaw's death. Calamity Jane became famous for her buckskins, but Martha Canary wore dresses like other frontier women. The image that remained came from an 1895 card by Henry Locke and Charles Peterson in Deadwood. She claimed to be an Army scout, most likely a camp follower. She tied her name to the myth of Wild Bill Hickok and was buried beside him. On November 9, 1867, the New York Times portrayed Kiowa Chief Satanta as astute, diplomatic, bold, and also cruel. 4 years later, after the attack on Henry Warren's wagon train at Salt Creek, Satanta, Bigtree, and Satink became the first indigenous people tried in the U.S. at the Jacksboro Court, and the story only grew more tense. William Clark Quantrill, a former teacher turned Confederate guerrilla leader, commanded Quantrill's raiders along the Missouri-Kansas border. He carried out ambushes and raids on Union detachments and towns. He promoted nighttime incursions and looting. He died, wounded and captured, in May 1865. His tactics shaped Frank and Jesse James as outlaws. This portrait of William F. Buffalo Bill Cody from the early 1870s captures the period when he was serving as a scout for the U.S. Army and as a buffalo hunter on the Great Plains. It marks the moment when his notoriety on the frontier was consolidating, a prelude to the shows that would later shape his persona and the myth of the Old West. In 1884, A. Frank Randall recorded at the San Carlos Reservation in Arizona Territory the first photos of Geronimo, Chiricahua healer and leader. Among them stands out the portrait in which he appears kneeling, with a Springfield 1873 carbine. The session, part of a series, shaped his public image and would still leave questions hanging. Who was the most notorious lawman of New Mexico? Many cite Pat Garrett. Among Hispanics, El Fego Baca stands out. Garrett gained fame for killing Billy the Kid in 1881 in a darkened room. Baca, in 1884, faced about 80 white cowboys, withstood nearly 4,000 shots and dynamite. After the siege, violence ceased in Socorro. July 1882, Arizona Territory. Johnny Ringo was found dead near Tombstone, a gunshot to the head, pistol fallen by his side. Was it suicide or a settling of accounts? Records and reports are divided. Wyatt Herp and Buckskin Frank Leslie claimed it was them, but nothing proves it. The doubt persists and keeps the case alive to this day, unanswered. In March 1886, photographer C.S. Fly left Tombstone, Arizona, alongside General George Crook, heading toward the Mexican border. The mission, to negotiate the surrender of Geronimo and the Chiricahua. In the Canon de los Embudos, he captured the only images of the war. This one shows men, women, and children. In the background, riders stand watch. Ezra Allen Minor, known as Bill Minor, served time in the U.S. for horse theft and stagecoach robbery. Released in 1880, he returned to crime and earned the nickname Gray Fox. In 1904, in Canada, he carried out what is considered the first successful train robbery. Oral tradition attributes to him the order, "Hands up," today widespread in the lore of the West. Henry Starr, outlaw, left prison and became the star of A Debtor to the Law, 1919, where he reenacted bank robberies. A distant relative of Sam, Belle Starr's husband, he had earned Theodore Roosevelt's pardon after helping disarm Cherokee Bill. After the film, he returned to crime and fell during a robbery in 1921 in Oklahoma. In April 1876 in New York, William R. Howell recorded his final portrait of George Armstrong Custer in cabinet card format. 2 months later, he would fall with part of the 7th Cavalry at Little Bighorn. Mindful of his own image, Custer posed more than 150 times. This session closed that pursuit. What story did that gaze already carry? Badman, or Billy, Brooks served as a deputy in Newton, Kansas, and later in Dodge City. Involved in disputed shootings, he abandoned the role. In 1874, he began driving stagecoaches for the Southwestern Stage Company. After losing the mail contract, he joined a scheme to rob rival shipments. Arrested, he was taken from his cell and lynched by a mob on July 29th. A photo kept by the family shows Seth Bullock, first sheriff of Deadwood. In 1876, he and his partner Saul Starr arrived in the Gold Rush town to open a hardware store. The day after their arrival, Wild Bill Hickok was killed by Jack McCall. The shock became a turning point. Bullock assumed order and transformed the camp into a place of law. Who is, after all, Frank Buckskin Leslie? Researcher McCubbin, rigorous with the origin of images, admits, the photo does not prove it is Buckskin Frank. The identification relies on another authenticated image. The man gained fame in 1882 when he killed Billy Claiborne at the Oriental Saloon in Tombstone in what was then Arizona Territory. And that was only the beginning. Tom "Blackjack" Ketchum, outlaw of the West, appeared after capture with his right arm amputated from wounds suffered while trying to rob a Colorado and Southern train. Detained in 1899, he was tried in New Mexico Territory and, on April 26, 1901, hanged. The case marked the tightening of railroad protection laws in the U.S. Southwest. Before becoming famous for capturing Bill Doolin alone in 1895, Bill Tillman lived another story. In 1883, in Kansas, he was part of the authorities who faced the so-called Dodge City War. The tension revolved around politics and public order. In the end, calm negotiation prevailed. The standoff ended without a shot, without deaths. At the debut of his historical collection, McCubbin presented a striking record. The Sheriff of Lincoln, Pat Garrett, the man who would kill Billy the Kid on July 14, 1881. The portrait, taken by James N. Furlow in Las Vegas around 1880, appeared after the capture of the gunman at Stinking Springs in New Mexico Territory on December 23, 1880. Minor in California. Between 1848 and 1855, the gold rush attracted migrants from America, Europe, and Asia and boosted the portrait market. Studios recorded in daguerreotype and ambrotype men with pans and pickaxes to prove their trade, send to family, or advertise themselves. Today, these images are central to the iconography of the Old West. Richard Little Dick West, who passed through the gangs of Bill Doolin and Al Jennings, alternated between bank and train robberies in the Oklahoma Territory. He became a fugitive, and the trail gave him away. A posse of deputies pursued him. On April 13, 1898, near Guthrie, Bill Tillman and Heck Thomas led the siege that ended his criminal career. Amid the frenzy of the West, Famed European and dancer, Lola Montez landed in California in 1853 and became an attraction in the Gold Rush saloons. Her number, the Tarantula Dance, drew stares. She shook her dress as if expelling spiders, lifting her petticoats. The scene between theater and mockery brought her instant fame and much debate. Probable mistake. The famous photo attributed to Josie, wife of Wyatt Herp, does not depict her. Although used by Glenn Boyer on the cover of I Married Wyatt Herp, 1976, and advertised in 1880, documentary evidence indicates it is a 1914 photogravure registered as Coloma, a sign of commercial reuse and late recoding of the image. A Texan born in 1853, John King Fisher started as a cowboy. Arrested for horse theft, he served little time and returned to the range armed. In the 1870s, he gathered a band on the border and, calling himself a ranger, hunted groups coming from Mexico. He claimed to act in response to incursions, and his relentless justice made him a feared name in the West. At age 20, John Henry Holliday graduated from the Pennsylvania College of Dental Surgery. In 1872, O.B. Morat recorded a portrait in carte de visite format, one of the few adult photos of the man the world would know as Doc Holliday, famous for the gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone. The image remained in the family, kept by cousin Mattie for decades. Dan Thrapp consolidated in 1964 the legacy of Al Sieber in the biography Al Sieber, Chief of Scouts. Sieber, a German and Union Civil War veteran, commanded George Crook's Scouts in Arizona during the campaigns of the 1870s-80s against the Chiricahua. In 1887, wounded in a San Carlos gunfight linked to Apache Kid, he effectively ended his career. In 1885, in William Notman's studio in Montreal, Sitting Bull posed beside Buffalo Bill Cody. Months later, he agreed to join Buffalo Bill's Wild West for 4 months. The photos became show promotion and sealed a rare crossover: indigenous leadership on the stage of the entertainment industry, an encounter that echoed beyond the studio. An old cabinet photo, dated around 1880, bears the caption, "Horse Thieves of New Mexico." But there is more in this scene. Scholars point out that the standing man may be John Kinney, leader of a gang that dominated horse and cattle theft in the territory between the 1870s and 1880s. Who were they, and why did they dare so much? It is not who many suppose. The inscription, Mangas, chief of the Warm Spring Apaches, led to confusion with Mangus Coloradus, a Chiricahua leader of the U.S. Southwest in the 19th century. The subject is his namesake son, photographed by A. Frank Randall in 1886. The Smithsonian preserves an albumen copy from the collection of General Nelson A. Miles. At 12 years old in the Arizona Territory, Felix Tellez was taken by Apaches. He grew up among them, fought as a warrior, and later served as a scout for the U.S. Army, earning the nickname Mickey Free. He continued living as an Apache on the White Mountain Reservation until 1914. The 1888 photo is attributed to Daniel F. Mitchell and Irwin Baer of Prescott. Have you heard of the Texas Rangers? This police force, active throughout the state and known nationwide, was born during the Republic of Texas before annexation to the U.S. In 1874, the Frontier Battalion was created with 6 companies. Company F, recorded around 1885, reveals how they operated patrolling borders and routes and their role in surveillance. In 1821, merchant William Becknell inaugurated the Santa Fe Trail, the first international route linking New Mexico, then a Mexican province, to the western frontier of the United States. For decades, merchants, soldiers, settlers, and caravans shaped Santa Fe. With the railroad in the 1880s, the route lost relevance and fell into disuse. In 1903, a camp near Phoenix housed lungers, tuberculosis patients who set up tents in search of Arizona's arid climate, recommended as a cure. Daily life was simple: rest, sun, and dry air. With no effective therapies, caravans headed into the desert. Health migration reshaped the region. Hospitals were rare. Tents became both shelter and hope. James Butler Wild Bill Hickok emerges as the first great gunfighter of the West. Fame was born from the 1865 duel in Springfield, Missouri, against Dave Tutt, a clash that became the model for gunfights in cinema. That same year, he appears in a carte de visite by Charles Schulten, displaying two Colt navies in cross-draw, a foreshadowing of the legend. Known as the Massacre Cowboys, the photograph, dated around 1885, is a cabinet card produced by Charles S. Baker and Eli Johnston in Douglas, then Arizona Territory. It portrays cowboys employed by Texas John Slaughter at the San Bernardino Ranch near present-day Douglas, working cattle along the U.S.-Mexico border. In this 1860 photo, clockwise from the top left corner, are Billy Richardson, Johnny Fry, Gus Cliff, and Charlie Cliff. Members of the Pony Express, a private horseback mail service between Missouri and California, they symbolize the beginning of the West's fast routes when delivery gained speed and kept the country connected. In 1887, John C.H. Grable recorded a photo and noted in the copyright the name of the cowboy portrayed, Fred Pierce, famous cowboy of Wyoming. Since then, research in the 1880 and 1890 censuses, newspapers of the time, and in the Wyoming Brand Book has not confirmed his existence. Who was this horseman, after all? A mystery that still intrigues researchers. John Burwell Omohundro Jr., Texas Jack, gained fame on the Chisum Trail drives. On stage, he showed ties with Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill Cody, pioneer of the Western show. In 1877, he created the troupe Texas Jack Combination. He died of pneumonia in Leadville, Colorado, a month before turning 34. In 1908, Cody commissioned a tombstone with the wrong age, 39. In 1889, Manor in Travis County was establishing itself as a modest agricultural hub in central Texas. Simple commercial streets and few services sustained the surrounding farms. The following year, official records listed 405 residents, a portrait of stability and connection with regional supply routes. In Holbrook, Arizona Territory, the Apache Sheriff Commodore Perry Owens went to serve the warrant against horse thief Andy Cooper. There was resistance, gunfire, and Cooper and brothers Samuel and John Blevins fell. Another Blevins was wounded. Months later, in 1888, Owens posed for Emma Albright in Albuquerque, New Mexico Territory. Portrayed around 1865, Tiburcio Vasquez consolidated his reputation as one of the most famous Hispano-Californian bandits. Between 1850 and 1874, he commanded stagecoach robberies, thefts, and cattle rustling. In 1874, shot and wounded by reporter George Beers, he was arrested. Taken to trial, he was hanged in 1875 in San Jose, California, in the northern part of the state. Around 1888, Mickey Free appears alongside his wives, Ethlay and Ochahe. Kidnapped in childhood, he became an interpreter and Apache scout for the U.S. Army, serving in campaigns in Arizona. The scene reveals family alliances through Apache customs amid tensions on the Arizona and New Mexico frontiers, a portrait of survival. When we speak of the Old West, the name that arises is Wyatt Herp, largely because of Bat Masterson. Former Army scout and sheriff, Earp's partner, he told Theodore Roosevelt that only Wyatt would show the real West. Aide Stuart Lake listened, found Herp, and in 1931 published a romanticized biography. Several scenes were Masterson's own experiences. A cabinet card from 1875 portrays Ben Thompson, notorious gunman and chief of police of Austin, in a half-length pose, formal attire, against a neutral background. Printed and mounted on stiff card, the image follows the commercial standard of the time, intended for sale and circulation in family albums. Studio produced, It is typical of 19th century photography. Around 1890, a carriage stops in front of the Beaumont Hotel in Ouray, Colorado. There, travelers and mining merchants crossed paths. Wooden facades and the dirt street reveal a town taking shape. Among guests and workers, the hotel stood as a pivot of local wealth and a hub of the routes that connected the region at the century's end. Frontier portrait, around 1850. The identity of the man remains unknown. In the rare daguerreotype, he appears of mixed roots, perhaps Métis, with work clothes, knife, and hatchet. These signs point to life in the frontier economy, in a zone of contact and conflict, where labor and self-defense blended in a daily life of risk. A cabinet card from the 1880s titled "The Real Cowboy Captured Alive" portrays on the left Cottonwood Charlie Nebo alongside Nicholas Janis, a French-American settler in Nebraska Territory. Sources link him to Joseph Antoine, interpreter at Fort Laramie, as a descendant, or perhaps brother, in what was then Wyoming Territory. Known as the Poet Scout, Captain Jack Crawford gained fame in the West as a U.S. Army scout in conflicts with indigenous peoples. Later, he brought stories to stages and schools, published poems and travel accounts, and defended civic education. By blending memory and celebration of the frontier, he shaped the idea of the West in popular imagination. Portrait from 1881. This 1850 daguerreotype shows James P. Beckworth, a figure of the fur trade who gained notoriety when the image appeared in his 1856 biography. Born in Virginia in 1778, son of an enslaved woman and an Irish overseer, he crossed the West from 1824 to 1866, opening routes and trading goods on the frontiers. Peter Bogardus, heir to a famous lineage of marksmen, carried a Remington 1888 and kept another at his belt. Trained under his father, Captain Bogardus, he performed with his brothers Eugene, Edward, and Henry in the shooting acts of Buffalo Bill's Wild West, a traveling show that popularized shooting culture at the end of the 19th century. In 1845, French gunsmith Louis-Nicolas Flaubert created the first single-piece cartridge. The metallic casing combined primer, powder, and projectile, simplifying the shot. This milestone retired the separate use of components. From then on, what the public calls a bullet became the standard and accelerated the shift from loose loading to standardized ammunition. A rarely recorded scene, a buffalo hunter. In the Old West, the slaughter was routine, but we almost never see the hunters themselves. This cabinet card, around 1880, shows a man with a Sharps rifle, equipment of the time, in a Payne and Stockdorf studio in Leadville, Colorado. A rare encounter with the one who pulled the trigger. From 1835 to 1885, the frontier became business. Former Texas Rangers, the 49ers, accepted contracts from Mexican state governments to hunt Apache and Comanche groups. Paid by private companies, they advanced from ranch to ranch. The proof of the work? Human scalps, receipts that sustained a market, all supported by official payments. In the photo, it reads Arizona Rangers, but the details tell another story. Low crown hats, short jackets, and cartridge belts typical of the 1870s, 1880s. Everything points to the late 1870s or early 1880s, when Arizona was still a territory. The official Arizona Rangers would only be created in 1901. The question remains, who then were these men? On September 7, 1876, the James Younger Gang's attempted robbery of the Northfield, Minnesota, bank ended in flight and capture. The episode generated a carte de visite made by Ira E. Sumner, standard for portraits of prisoners and the dead, which circulated by the thousands. Today, few copies remain kept in public and private collections. In the photo, around 1850, a bullwhacker of the fund raises the whip that guided oxen pulling heavy wagons. This trade, practiced by men and also by some women, kept convoys moving and sustained commerce before the arrival of the rails. Paradox: a key piece of the route, he lived at the lowest rung of the social scale. In the post-Civil War era, the James Younger Gang gained ground in Missouri and surrounding areas. Led by Jesse and Frank James alongside the Younger brothers, they shifted from the scars of conflict to bank and train robberies. The press made noise, Pinkerton tightened the net, and their notoriety exploded until it collapsed in the failed Northfield Raid in 1876, Minnesota. Late 1870s, Samantha Fallon ran the San Jose House Hotel and a millinery in Tombstone, Arizona territory. Her image was recorded by C.S. Fly around 1879. Pointed out as Ed Schiefelin's partner, she would change course. She married Zachary Taylor on December 14, 1880. But the story held twists. A carte de visite from 1878, with the portrait of Charles Baudry alongside his wife Manuela, survived stained with blood. It was taken from Baudry's body after the shootout at Stinking Springs, New Mexico, on December 23, 1880, when Lincoln County Sheriff Pat Garrett killed him, and in the same strike captured Billy the Kid. Around 1900, in Beaumont, Jefferson County, the grocery on Pear Street operated under the direction of Melton Bowie. Considered one of the first black entrepreneurs, he energized local commerce. Documents highlight his carpentry skills, a prestige that opened doors on multiple fronts. His story still echoes in the city. In 1887, Cherokee leader Ned Christie became a target after being accused, without evidence, of killing federal deputy Dan Maples. Years of pursuit followed in Indian Territory with sieges and escapes. In 1892, a posse blew up his refuge and executed him. Afterwards, lawmen tied his body to a door and posed for photos, displaying it as a trophy. March 1886. In the negotiations between General George Crook and Geronimo, in the Canon de los Embudos, Sonora, photographer C.S. Fly recorded an Apache in a three-piece suit. Fly, or his wife, said it was the Apache Kid, a version reinforced by William Sparks. Historian Granville Stewart countered, "It is not the Kid." In Deadwood, Dakota Territory, the camp grew quickly. Muddy streets, tents, and saloons in a row, the clatter of pans in the creek, and rifle guards. Around 1876, Wild Bill Hickok arrived. The gold rush drew migrants, merchants, and gamblers, while law, fragile, depended on local committees. We see Harry Yount, the mountain man, on the summit of Berthoud Pass in the Colorado Rockies around 1874. At that time, he lived by hunting and guiding. Years later, he would be recognized as the first Yellowstone Ranger. The scene marks the transition from solitary exploration to official protection of the parks, which would soon change the American West.